Alternative Armies on Guard, a game about dueling. In the last few videos, we did the sword fighting duels, but this one rule book also includes rules for pistol duels and horseback duels. We're going to look at the second one today, but first, the duels that we've fought to date have taken place on this flat, featureless plane. And just as with a mass battle combat fought on a flat, featureless plane, the absence of terrain limits the amount of tactical acumen that you can exhibit. If we had added in just a tree or two, then that would have dramatically impacted the choices and the options available to each of our combatants. Constraining our combatants to a bridge just 4 squares wide and presenting them with the threat of being pushed or falling off of the side of the bridge, meaning an automatic defeat, dramatically changes the calculus of the game. It might speed it up, it might slow it down. We won't know until we actually try that, which we're not going to do today, but I thought it's important to lead with that. As I said, today we're going to take a look at the pistol dueling rules. And in keeping with the historical antecedents, pistol duels are largely ceremonial affairs. Terrain won't be a factor here, so we're back on our flat, featureless plane. Our combatants will begin back to back in the center of the... Actually, that's not exactly true. The way On Guard handles pistol duels is with a 4-step process. And for today, Monsieur de Juguer and Monsieur Cruller are acting as seconds for good friends of theirs in red and blue. We'll put the dice on the right side so that the blue is on the blue side, the red is on Team Red side. For this, all of the stats that we've talked about before, strength, reflexes, none of those really matters. Maybe a couple of the skills might come into play, but for this pistol duel, we are going to start off with step number 1, the challenge. The first 3 phases of this ceremonial turn, we will select 1 die, and that will be our action. We'll roll. Essentially, what we're going to do is mimic the process by which these duels are fought. One of our combatants will issue a challenge, the other will accept it. And we'll find out how noble and honorable and dignified the challenge and the receipt are. The second step is to stand back to back and begin the walk. We'll separate our combatants by 4 squares, and we'll see how well they keep their nerve. On the third phase, they will turn to face each other, and again, we'll check the nerve for the 2 combatants. We'll find out how shaky their hand is, and finally, in phase 4, we will do the actual shooting. Now, with each one of those phases, if we were playing a 2-player game, each player would select one of their dice, and that will be the die that they use for their activation. As with the sword fights, you'll roll the die, and on a 1 through 4 you fail, and that die comes out of your pool. So for the next few phases, you have fewer dice. If you fail the first 3 phases, you are going to be stuck with just these 2 dice to choose from. When it comes time to shoot, once again, you will choose one of your dice to activate, and when the 2 dice are chosen, whoever's die is the smaller die will get his shot off first. He will hit on a 5 or better and then check for damage, and if he has not killed his opponent will get to return fire. There is a different damage chart that we'll see shortly. For every failure you make, you will have a -1 on that attack die. Kind of. There's penalties for failure, and there are bonuses if you roll a 10 or higher. So you do have incentive to use these higher dice in the first 3 phases. However, if you fail, those higher dice that are more likely to provide a hit on the shooting will not be available. So ultimately, I think this is going to be a much faster experience. So let's set it up. Our 2 combatants have met, and I'm just going to start them off back to back. Although as we said, the first option is the challenge. One of these gentlemen has accused the other one of playing Dungeons and Dragons wrong, and of course, that is a vile insult that cannot be allowed to stand. So the opponent has said, well, I'll accept your challenge. Now let's see how well he does. And so for this first turn, first phase of the turn, we do a roll-off. I'm selecting a D12 for both of these fellas to see if we can get that 10 or better. If you roll a 10 or better on this phase of the game, you gain 1 honor point for the brave and courteous delivery of the challenge, or acceptance of the challenge, as the case may be. On a 1 to 4, it means your character will suffer from the shakes. You'll have a -1 on your to hit roll when you actually take the shot. So let's roll for these two fellas and see what happens. They have both failed, meaning they will both be at -1 on the shot. Even worse, the d12s for both of these figures are removed from their options. For the second phase, the walk, these characters are now going to be separated by 4. They're going to take their 1, 2, 3, 4 steps forward, and they have to choose. In this case, let's say Red decides he's shooting for the 10. If he can score a 10, then he will get a reroll on the next phase. The gentleman in blue says, I really want to win this, and I really want the 10 as well, and I'm willing to sacrifice my 20-sided to get it. So with an 8 and a 9, both succeed, and they have shown some bravery. They've recovered their nerve. They are at peace with what is about to happen. The third phase is the turn. They turn to face each other, and we have yet another die roll. Now both characters turn and face their opponent. Select a die in secret, and this time, hey, you know, that worked out pretty well for my opponent. We'll both use the d20 for this roll. And in this case, if you suffer from 0 to 4, now neither gets a reroll, but on a 0, they both pass. So they have both succeeded. And with a 10 or better, they have both adopted a slightly angled stance compared to their opponent, which will make it harder to hit them on the shooting phase. In fact, both of the shooters will be at -1 when they try to damage their foe. The dice go back in the pool, and now it is time for the shot. And here's where we have to decide which dice do each of these gentlemen want to use. There is a little bit of a difference here. If you select a die that is within 1 step of your opponent, in other words, for an 8 and a 10, both of these will be rolled and the damage will be applied simultaneously. If, however, your die is 2 steps lower than your opponent, not only do you get your shot off faster than your opponent, but if you wound or kill your opponent, he doesn't even get his shot off. As this is a learning game, I'm going to randomize which die is selected for each opponent. I'm going to roll a d12, and on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's the die that will be selected. 10, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12. So they both have opted for. They are shamed by their conduct during the walk, and they have both decided that they are going to stand and deliver. They definitely want to hit more than they want to be the first. So we make a simple 2-hit roll, and remember, they are both at -1. So they will be hitting on 6s. With a result of a 10 and a 12, both of them hit. The damage result is a very clever bit of game design, particularly given that both of our combatants are at -1 on their damage roll. Notice that a 1 is a near miss, and the target is not wounded. On a 2 to 4, the target is grazed, all the way up to a 10 where the target is killed. That sequence repeats up through 20, which means if you're rolling d20s and you're at -1 on that die roll, there is only 1 chance that you actually kill your opponent. Very clever. So we roll, and the red die will be for the red hat, the blue die will be for the blue hat, and that's how we'll keep track. So with the result of a 5, the blue hat is merely grazed, but with a 7, the red hat target suffers 2 wounds. This means that blue was on target, did 2 wounds to red, and as a result, red is going to fall with 2 wounds. It is an honorable duel, and blue has retained his honor, as has red, but then we go, because this is a game of campaigns, we go to the injury recovery table, and you must use one of the dice remaining in your pool. Had red missed with his shot, he would not have the d20 available, and he would have to choose from one of these dice, meaning a much greater probability that he does not recover. he dies of his wounds. However, we do have a d20, and so that is what we'll roll. I like them odds, and with a result of a 20, the duelist is wounded but recovers without harm, long-term harm after a few weeks rest and tender treatment. And that's it. Pretty simple, really, but very evocative and very in keeping with the style of these duels. I think you could use this for Wild West duels as well. It's high noon, you could reskin it. Wouldn't be too much trouble. The one thing that I will leave you with is that this game also includes rules for a tournament. Now, we've been doing simple honorable duels to first blood so far, but you could just as easily do a tournament in which a group of players assemble to fight a series of duels. All characters have to fight one duel with each of the other duelists. So assume that you have 4 duelists doing this tournament. That means you're going to have, let's see, it would be the first guy's going to fight 3. That would be 7 duels altogether. And the first time I read through this rule book, I thought, man, that would take forever, particularly seeing that the sword fights typically take about 30 minutes to resolve. You're not going to get through that in an afternoon. However, if you included a probability of the types of duels, include a chance that the duel fought as a pistol duel, and suddenly this becomes much more manageable. It is also worth pointing out that given the likelihood of death in a pistol duel, or even in a sword fighting duel, we haven't seen it yet because we haven't had much opportunity for the big D20 attacks. Again, with a wide open arena, there's too much room to avoid charges. If you're fighting on a bridge or in constrained terrain, the charges become much more likely, and this big damage roll is far more likely to seriously, meaning deliver 2 wounds to one of the combatants. That's going to make it harder for him to recover and more likely that he dies of his wounds, which will, of course, shorten the tournament greatly. But that is another way of playing. And to the insult, we should add, he told a yo mama joke that was much too accurate, or said yo mama is a blue-haired feminist, which, maybe those are the same ones. I don't know. Very interesting game. I will have to think about how to do a horseback duel. But for the time being, we still have a lot of room to explore, as I said, how this rule set changes when you've got a situation where your duelists are attempting to poke each other while they're standing on a bridge, or, more to the point, if you can't poke him, get him in a position where you can push him off and into the water. I've also gone ahead and, thanks to the Dungeons & Dragons crowd, I found another fun little bridge here. Imagine if your duelists start, and that's almost impossible to see. Let me fix the lighting. On opposite sides of a river. Fighting on the bridge is not a problem. This is a D&D map, so some of these squares you're going to have to figure out. Like these guys, I would call these not on the bridge. There's no railing, so if you get pushed off into the water, I would also argue that the water, you're at a lower elevation. When you fight at a higher elevation, the game does have rules for that. In an event like this, where red is on the bridge and he has successfully struck at his opponent, normally he would roll the same die that he used for the attack, but because he is at a higher elevation, he gets a 1 die type boost and is much more likely to do more damage. His foe will want to back off, but if he leaves the arena of his own will, in the case of a duel such as this, he has fled, and so that would be bad. If he gets pushed off, then that would be a problem for him as well. And of course, when you're in the water, the slick moss-covered rocks present a hazard as well. And that's an interesting bit of game design as well. Our blue duelist does not like taking extra damage, so he opts to withdraw. He moves his 1 step, then he makes a slip check. And we number the 4 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we roll a d10. If we get a 5 or better, he's still on his feet. However, if we roll a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, he winds up in that square, and because he has stumbled, cannot attack or defend on this turn. He doesn't get to make an attack roll. He doesn't get to nominate an attack roll to defend against, although our plucky hero will now be forced to leap into the water to, in order to press his attack. depending, of course, on what his threat range is. If it's something like this, he may be able to attack regardless of the fact that his opponent has slipped. So that extra little bit of randomness adds just that little extra bit of spice to the proceedings. You love it. I would argue that if you have a bridge such as this, with some kind of a railing, that being pushed off allows you to make some form of a reflex check to see if you actually do tumble over. But that is a rules discussion for another video. Until next time, I'm praying for you.